Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
Amazon's moved to this new regional fulfillment model. So they've brought low weeks of cover in from brands because they're rebuilding their whole inventory balancing behind the scenes in their network so that they can create micro fulfillment centers and go point to point.
Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. This episode, Ninad and I welcome Corey Aperian, CEO of DaVinci Micro Fulfillment. Corey has over 15 years of experience growing brands and creating strategic supply chain solutions. He launched DaVinci Micro Fulfillment in May of 2020, and we look forward to this conversation where we'll break down all things related to a successful micro fulfillment program. Corey, absolute pleasure to have you join us today, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. The pleasure is all mine. This is a big milestone for DaVinci and myself to be on this podcast, which I feel like a lot of people say when they come on here.
No, it's also the other way around, Corey, because I just have to add that, I've had many conversations with you in the past, the amount of things that I've learned with you, and then I go out and talk to people about how much knowledge I have, but that all starts with you, specifically in the Amazon arena, right? And we'll get into that, but there is a lot that we are going to be learning over here today. I'm really looking forward to it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And after we get through Corey's journey, we're actually going to have him take us to Amazon school. So stay tuned for that here in a few minutes. But Corey, wanted to start with a little bit about your journey. You have a really interesting background, and it includes everything from e-commerce merchandising, driving revenue for brands, supply chain leadership, supply chain consulting, and certainly entrepreneurship with the launch of DaVinci. And wanted to see if you could share with the audience kind of your journey and, leading up to that aha moment or decision point you had where you made the decision to launch DaVinci Micro Fulfillment.
Yeah, absolutely. I majored in supply chain management at Syracuse University, 2000 to 2004. At that point in time, there were only 4 schools in the U.S. that offered supply chain as a major. My first week of college, I went to go pick my major. I knew I didn't want to be a finance major, didn't know what I wanted to do, and just literally fell in love with supply chain right out the gate. Point of origin to point of consumption, everything in between. Amazon.com was my case study for 4 years. That was offered. That was the really early days. In my junior year, to get internship credits, I worked in a wholesale distributor that was shipping Clorox Brita water filters specifically into Amazon's FC network. At that point in time, they had 4, maybe 5 fulfillment centers, and most of it was shipping into the Lexington, Kentucky area. And I cut my teeth in the warehouse and started in the receiving department and learning inventory and receiving and everything around the pick, pack, and ship operations of bulk fulfillments. And senior year, the CEO of that company, who was a wholesale distributor in home and garden, personal care electrics, outdoor living, consumer electronics, every major brand of housewares that you could think of, from Bissell Floor Care, KitchenAid, Philips, Norelco, et cetera, was basically approached by Amazon's senior team saying, we're starting this thing called the dropship program. We're picking, 3 distributors around the country to start for these categories. We want you to be a part of it. That CEO saw that I added some 21st century principles of supply chain and, called me up a week before I graduated and said, hey, we just got asked to go start this thing called dropship. We have no idea what it is. You want to come start. So I called one of my professors and said, I'm going to start for this wholesaler. Can you come down and walk the floor with me and give me some pointers? He spent a day with me. After he left, I Googled how to wire a Cat 5 cable and bought some reams and some extra rollers. And I pieced together this pick and pack operation. And within 2 months, we launched a multi-million-dollar business, and Amazon gave us, me specifically, an award for being their top fulfillment partner out of the categories that they had. And, wow. I remember the award, like it was yesterday. It was, fastest response time and highest attention to detail out of any vendor there. And, I can't say that I'm smarter than anybody else, but I've paid attention and I've learned, and I got my real MBA and experience, through the past 20 years of the e-commerce ecosystem. And fast forward, I took that business model and copied it to every major retailer. And I really helped brands build their online strategies through a wholesaler, through Macy's and Walgreens and Lowe's and Target and Walmart and so on and so forth. And really watch the evolution of 1P, 3P marketplace and D2C, which we'll break apart in a little bit. And I was not only building the pick and pack operations and overseeing all the integrations and learning all the ins and outs there, but I was also building all the new item setups and creating all the content and pulling all the marketing levers that were available. And I understood very early on that brands are the ones who are really asked to do the heavy lifting. They are not set up for each's fulfillment or single piece returns. In fact, back then they were terrified of that. So they would outsource to a wholesaler so that they could just get it off their P&L, and the unit of measure conversions kind of became someone else's problem, and the cash collection and all of that, right? The inventory control. And at the same time, it was a one-to-many thing, right? A wholesaler like myself at the time could go integrate with Walgreens and Walmart and Target and Amazon and just buy from KitchenAid and then go sell it to all those channels. Mm-hmm. And basically, the problem with that is that it kind of became a race to the bottom for a lot of these brands, because there were distributors and suppliers that were selling these products unauthorized on an Amazon marketplace, on an eBay, on a Walmart marketplace. They would do really well at Amazon because of Amazon's growth, and they would bring that business direct, but they would want to still continue to fulfill for a Walmart.com and Target.com. But the inventory control was really challenging because there was not enough volume to sustain that for inbound truckloads and full truckloads. Fast forward, the consumer buying habit is changing. And, many, many years ago, Amazon Prime expected 2 days, and then other channels were leaves your warehouse in 48 hours. Didn't matter how much, time it took to go deliver. Now that's obviously not the case at all. 90+% of consumers out there opt in for 1 day delivery in Amazon Prime, not same day, not 2 day, but next day. So as I went along on my journey and started learning all the ins and outs of the ecosystem, watching the consumer buying habit update, I spent time in China manufacturing my own brands and getting those brands from online sales into every major brick and mortar on the shelf, and really understanding the global supply chain, domestic intralogistics, and how the ecosystem cohesively works together from an inventory control, a transportation, a merchandising and assortment planning, and an integration perspective. I really allowed myself to amass all this knowledge, right? And because I've touched all those things and pulled all these levers, it really brought me to the place of creating DaVinci Micro Fulfillment, which really was birthed out of the customer buying habit evolving, the operating expense of a large distribution center in one area of the country trying to fulfill an order in same day, 1 day, 2 day from a delivery perspective, and understanding how to replenish inventories and maintain that flywheel so that you're always creating turns. And after I exited my last company, I was reading Walter Isaacson's Leonardo da Vinci book. My now 5-year-old, who was 1.5 at the time, his name is Leo. So I knew that I was going to call my next company Da Vinci after I sold my last one. And this concept of micro fulfillment, of using smaller footprint buildings with forward deployed inventories as the strategy, just was an aha moment for me. All the buildings that I've operated and built in the past were 1 million or several 100,000 square feet of space in 1 or 2, maybe 3 areas of the US. And there's a lot of challenges with that type of complexity and size. And forward deployed inventory focused on picking and packing and just fast turns of eaches, to me, is a more simpler way to do it. And although what we do is complex on some level, I think we do it in a very simple way, from our pricing model to the technology we've deployed to how we onboard partners. And we have become a growth engine for brands that are operating in a multi-channel fulfillment environment that need to fulfill in same day, 1 day, 2 day cadence in an agnostic category environment.
That makes a lot of sense. And so one thing I have to say, I generally say all good operators should also be tech savvy, and all tech folks within the warehousing space should be very well versed with operations and spend time there for you to be able to perform your job to the best of your ability, right? What you just brought up, right? Like that 20-year journey, going from being a brand, being a seller, being starting new programs, building operations, merchandising, manufacturing, transportation. That's the experience, right? Like, and I would say that makes you a bit of a unicorn in this space, because there is a lot of people with the general understanding, but the depth of understanding of all those subjects. And then you just stick to this merchandising side of the universe to say, okay, how do I help people leverage? And I specifically speak to Amazon, right? How do I help people build an Amazon strategy? Because that's the big question that you see in the market, that, most of the folks that you talk to, they still don't have Amazon strategy. A lot of brands don't have it. A lot of retailers don't have it. And I think there is a general lack of consultative, and I'm not talking about consulting, right? But consultative information that is available on what should I do. An easy button that basically says, here's how my profile looks. How should I be leveraging Amazon? And that's lacking. And I think all of that exists in your brain. So we'd like to squeeze that out.
Yeah, no, I want to share it. And I really appreciate that. It's very true. I mean, I very much believe in an Amazon and mentality, not Amazon verse. There's a lot of companies. There's, some competitors. There's some other companies that they go out there and it's Amazon verse. How do I just do D2C and marketplace? And the reality is that Amazon's 50% of the US volume, and the inline and offline experience that customers have from a halo effect is a real thing. And even if you have your brands merchandised the right way on Amazon, you're going to get that benefit, because search and research and education is one of the main reasons that customers go shop online. And 70+ % of those customers go right to Amazon first, outside of Google, if not more.
I think a lot of the argument around, that not having Amazon that we heard before, and I think everyone's perspective is changing quite a bit at this time, but the argument always stood that, hey, the brand experience, right? Like when I sell through my own channel, then I have my branded box and that's what the customer's getting versus the brown box that Amazon's going to send, and my brand just gets diluted. But I guess there are programs where they don't get diluted. Is that correct, Corey, from an Amazon standpoint? That you could leverage your own fulfillment or, partner with a 3PL and could do it. And maybe, this could be a good segue into all the programs that Amazon allows people to leverage.
Yeah. There used to be a lot of strict rules from Amazon if you're in the 1P side, which they now call direct fulfillment. So that's their vendor central side. So Amazon has two sides. They have vendor central and they have seller central. Amazon Vendor Central, you could ship bulk into their FC and you're selling it to them and they're retailing it to the end customer and doing their fulfillment. Direct fulfillment is still Vendor Central. You're still wholesaling it to them, but they're paying the freight to the end customer and it's coming from either the brand or another supplier's warehouse. Typically, it's going to be a third-party logistics company because the brand's still the vendor of record there. But it could be from a distributor as well. It just is not under that same vendor number. There's no tie to that. So all the data gets lost and things like that. And then there's Seller Central, and there's really 4 ways to sell. One of them is not as big. It's called Amazon Local, where some brands can get invited and they can offer same day deliveries, very zip code specific opportunities there. And the 2 core ones are FBA, which everybody knows about. It's more of a consignment model. It's a transfer order from a brand or supplier into Amazon. They hold that inventory and they fulfill as orders come in, and they pay every 2 weeks against the orders that came in on that 2-week time frame. There's a lot of new restrictions on that. And then there's merchant fulfilled, which is very similar, other than the fact that it's coming from that supplier or third-party logistics company's fulfillment center to the end customer. That brand is responsible for the outbound freight and tax nexus and reporting of that. And then the third one is called Seller Fulfilled Prime, which is very similar to Merchant Filled and just got turned back on and announced last week that they're now accepting new applications where you can earn a Prime badge if you hit metrics from Amazon for 1 to 2 day deliveries, 6 days a week shipping. Very, very strict metrics, not that unsimilar to the direct fulfillment metrics, a little bit different. But you can buy Amazon's labels essentially and get a Prime badge if you can maintain metrics across certain regions on that 1 to 2 day radius around wherever you're shipping from. And if you can do it with a physical location network across the US on direct fulfillment and seller fulfilled Prime, you can get access countrywide with a Prime badge outside of Amazon's environment. And the way that I've always sold to Amazon and to every major retailer, just to be clear, being able, if you're a brand, you have the control. This is an inherent difference in how we look at it. And one of the reasons we incorporate the merchandising side, because I think it's really important for brands to understand who they're selling to and what products they're selling, because you can't just sell every item to every online channel, just like you can't sell every item to every brick and mortar store. However, there is a cohesive nature of an inline and offline assortment plan. And if you are selling into Amazon, who doesn't have much of a brick and mortar footprint, right? Obviously, they have Whole Foods and Amazon Go and things like that. But you need to create agility in your own model where you're not shipping 100% of your inventories into Amazon and beholden to low weeks of cover from them, getting turned off, them holding the inventory and another one of your retailers dropping price and you get a buy box issue where all of a sudden you're selling something below where you want to be or getting a chargeback. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. And there's a profitability and consumer experience to why you would want to have some of your items, ASINs they call, that's the Amazon stock identification number, backing up your core items within Amazon's own FC network, whether it's vendor central or seller central. So understanding how you're selling is, I think, the most important thing. And the next thing is, what's the assortment that you're selling? So if you're set up to sell direct to consumer, direct to FC, and in some cases, direct to store and distribution center, you can walk up to any buyer or end consumer, theoretically, and never get a no, right? You get to control your own destiny. And if you understand how the ecosystem works, and then you can now pull your own levers, you're just going to be creating flywheels and creating inventory turns. And that's the name of the game.
That's correct. Yeah. So, we spoke about Vendor Central and Seller Central, spoke about two programs within Vendor Central, right? You have the 1P, the traditional retail, send stuff to them. Then you got the 1P drop ship, which is Amazon Direct. Is that correct?
Direct fulfillment.
Direct fulfillment. And when it's Amazon Direct fulfillment, now you are doing the shipping. Is that also, so I would assume everything is Prime eligible at that point, but then you need to maintain metrics, right?
Well, yeah. So when you start on direct fulfillment, your first 30 days for a new warehouse, you do not get a Prime badge. You have to earn it. And once you earn it, you have to maintain metrics, and they're very strict, right? You have to ship on time. Those goods not only have to be manifested on time, but they have to be scanned into the carrier network on time. They have to be delivering at the same time that Amazon told the customer that it's delivering. And that has to be accurate, right? So there's like really 4 levels of metric to maintain what they call a GD, guaranteed delivery status. And in many cases, it requires up to a 6-hour cycle time on orders.
And in that case, is the seller of record would be Amazon, right? At the end of the day, still the seller of record, the shipper of record
to the end customer. It would be ships and sold by Amazon on site, right, is what you would see in the buy box, not ships by Amazon and fulfilled by. Yeah.
That's correct. And so who pays for the transportation in that particular scenario?
Amazon.
Amazon pays for the transportation, and they could have multiple carriers coming to your warehouse, or do they have a choice of where you set up your warehouses as well? Because to be able to be, you need optimal shipping strategy. You need to be spread out in multiple locations. There is no way you can pull off Amazon Direct Fulfillment from a single location. That wouldn't be the case.
You can do it. You're just not going to get a Prime badge, and Amazon's likely they're gonna route orders per warehouse in that case. And it depends if you have inventory in their FC network or not. And again, this very much goes back to the categories that you're servicing and the assortment that you put out on Amazon. I would use, if I'm a brand and I have a high volume with Amazon, you can't get invited to Vendor Central today unless you have a certain number of volume. So if you're a brand who's already in Vendor Central, I think the first thing you do is go get a direct fulfillment account. Talk to your vendor manager. You have to have that. And Amazon's moved to this new regional fulfillment model. So they've brought low weeks of cover in from brands because they're rebuilding their whole inventory balancing behind the scenes in their network so that they can create micro fulfillment centers and go point to point. Basically, what they've designed is, a Da Vinci micro fulfillment. I mean, I'm not comparing myself to them, but it's the same concept of smaller footprint buildings and point-to-point deliveries on a thesis of inventory control to enable a lower operating expense. Same day delivery is a byproduct of it. It's the lower operating expense that's the critical piece, and the inventory control that's the critical piece.
That makes a lot of sense. And so now just to move on to the right side, because I have a diagram in front of me, but moving on to the right side, which would be Seller Central, right? Within that, I think FBA is well understood. You sell, you send stuff to Amazon, Amazon ships it on your behalf, charges you X as a 3PL. But then you said there is FBM and Amazon Local, and then there is SFP. And it seems like, first of all, FBM, you could technically consider SFP as just a sub-program of FBM, right? Like, so you get fulfilled by merchant, then you got to earn yourself into seller fulfilled prime, right? Like you got to just, how you explain that for the direct fulfillment, it would be similar. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, it would be. And depending on how your infrastructure is set up, in a perfect world, and you can manage decentralized inventory from a physical location network that can fulfill same day orders and deliver within 1 to 2 days across the entire US, I think you can make the argument SFP is the way to go exclusively, right? Okay. There could be some cases where it's more profitable to do FBA from a freight perspective, or, and I think the P&L management becomes really important, right? If you're doing FBM, you're not getting a prime badge. However, you can also make the argument that there are certain cases, especially with new Amazon cubic inch requirements of what you're allowed to put into FBA and the turns within, that you want to focus, just like with vendor central bulk, your full pallet, full truckload inventories, your core items, that 80-20 rule, you want to put those into Amazon's network. Their network is their network for a reason, right? They're the biggest and baddest and the best out there, what they do. In many categories, non-oversized items specifically, like high value, low weight items, laptops, hard drives, things like that. Yep. There's nobody better. And it's hard to say that you're going to be more profitable the other way. However, there are certain items, a first class mail type item, a first class package type SKU that's a low value, low weight item. It may not make sense to put that into Amazon's network. And although you may not get a prime badge for that, there's a profitability cadence of things that you need to be able to sell to Amazon. And if you can manage, I think you can make the argument in certain suppliers and channels that they should have all four: FBA, merchant filled, SFP, and Amazon Local. And I know many SFP sellers that do that today.
And who pays for the transportation in this case? So there is the merchant.
Yeah.
Is there a case, and whose label are you buying? Are you buying Amazon's label, or can you use your own rates with whatever carriers?
In SFP, you're using Amazon's labels.
Okay. And there is no provision for being able to use your own labels, right?
I don't believe so in SFP. The new program, I'm not 100% certain on that, but it's brand new. So I'm not sure if that's public yet. But I can tell you on merchant filled, it's 100% your dime. And, the traditional parcel carriers in there. However, there are some local carriers now that are getting approved in merchant filled. And that's a really big deal.
Okay. And would that be similar to the Amazon Local? Because that's kind of the last program there.
You can use anybody for that. You could use DoorDash or Uber if you wanted to.
Would you be able to explain what Amazon Local is exactly as a program?
Yeah, it's basically being able to have very zip code level detailed metrics on same day deliveries that you can offer in a very short radius around wherever you're fulfilling from. And you could use any carrier to get it to an end consumer. So if you wanted to offer, think of maybe like, you can think of a Dashmart-esque type opportunity, or like an Etsy even type opportunity, where, I think Etsy is probably more of the comparison from an item perspective of what you're looking at, and you can get it to the customer in whatever experience you need to.
That sounds fantastic. This covers for me the entire gamut. Am I missing any programs? I've heard of one called Amazon Vendor Flex. Vendor
Flex is a part of direct fulfillment. What Vendor Flex is doing is Amazon setting up fulfillment operations in your fulfillment center or distribution center as the brand. That comes with a cost, obviously. They are basically fencing off their area, and they go put Amazon employees and their technology and conveyors into a small area within a large brand's distribution center. and they then do their own fulfillment. And Amazon, they drag you to where you need to be. You know, if they want your product and your items, they're gonna get you there. And if you can't, get inventory into their FC, and they've seen these types of things, they're going to want to do that and open up that opportunity so that, and there's a benefit to them to doing that in some cases. For the brand, I think it's a good entree into direct fulfillment. There's integration challenges at times. There could be, security type challenges. There's certainly inventory control things where you're moving stuff across the line and you're still getting a purchase order from Amazon. And there's a cost to that as well. But I think it's a great program for some.
Yeah. For some. Yeah.
Yeah.
That some happens to be a small number, but yeah, it's a great program for some. Thank you very much for all of that.
Yeah, that was awesome, Corey, and exactly what we wanted. I think it'll be interesting with, as you said last week, they kind of reintroduced Seller Fulfilled Prime with more details to follow. But I think it's important for everyone to kind of take a look at those details, because I know Nanad and I, and maybe you do as well, we have a lot of scar tissue from the 2010s era when it first came out, where running fulfillment centers, you would pick, pack, and get the shipment out on time. So the metrics, you hit the metrics from a operational standpoint. But when you didn't use Amazon's label, you used a common carrier label, you actually would get penalized if it was supposed to be delivered in 2 days and it was delivered in 3 or 4. As a seller under Seller Fulfilled Prime, we saw many, many, many brands kind of lose the badge and lose the right to participate in the program because the carrier had an issue. Even if it was a weather delay, a storm, it didn't matter. If the experience wasn't there. And we saw a lot of brands kind of get removed from that program. So I think it'll be really important to see if Amazon's going to allow that, or now that their carrier network is as strong as it is today, they don't even allow that as an option.
It's interesting. I mean, we're lucky. We're on the direct fulfillment side. We've been invited into the ATS program, so their carrier network is actually picking up from our MFCs now to go deliver their DSP network and fleet of trucks, in addition to UPS and others. I think the really interesting thing there, though, is to see if they're going to move that into SFP. But I think one of the things, and it's a lot of legacy suppliers have built their operation around SFP, and they've done it well in the locations where they're operating from. I don't know how many are doing it on full national scale at this point still. But what I will say is that the technology and precision that's available today, just in a few short years off of those parcel carriers, the UPS, even post office on some level, and FedEx specifically, for those labels and understanding somewhat exactly of a window of when it's going to be delivered from the origin point is so much stronger. And I think if managed correctly with the right technology and the right physical location network, people can be really successful in this new program.
Well, I think that tees us up for where we wanted to go next, was getting your thoughts on kind of the state of the union for everything last mile delivery and localized carriers. So, and your thoughts on maybe you just covered that too, on how local carriers have evolved over the past, couple years to support same day, 1 day, and 2 day, and what you're seeing on that front.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think similarly to how a lot of suppliers walked out of Amazon SFP or got kicked out of SFP, because they couldn't meet the metrics. I think there's a lot of people out there that are looking down upon decentralized inventory, and specifically micro fulfillment, because they look at rapid grocery, right? And they see these 15-minute ultra fast deliveries that failed. And they failed in Manhattan because of zoning and easement and giving away shopping carts for $100 when it costs $300, and solving a problem that's, maybe a little too early and things like that. Or, I very much believe in automation, but, robotic companies going in and just selling, an offset of CapEx, right? And that's not necessarily what brands need right now, who are, again, back to what we were talking about earlier, the heavy lifting is done by the brands. They have the control. And I think what they want is inventory, because this is what the customer wants. They want their orders to be delivered precisely, sustainably, and at the lowest cost of fulfillment. And to enable that, you need to get closer to the customer. And I think local carriers are starting to develop and understand that. And they're doing a lot of things that are really unique with middle mile and sortation. And that's something that we've focused really heavily on, because if you can partner with the local carriers and get inventory and orders injected into local hubs, and they can add a level of sortation, and whether it's being handed to a gig or a W-2 or a franchise worker, and all of those models exist today, and we can talk about the positives and benefits and negatives of all of that. To me, that's a really unique way to do it, because you take a physical location network of X number of buildings and it feels like 10 or 12 or 15 with that middle mile injection. And there's such great technology out there now where you can be able to geofence at shopping cart for D2C channels and marketplace channels, where the suppliers are the ones asked to pay the freight out. And, in a direct fulfillment channel, Walmart.com 1P, Target.com 1P, they're telling you use UPS, use FedEx, use ATS, and they're telling you where to ship from typically now. That has evolved. And you have to be really precise with that. You'll get negatively dinged from a chargeback perspective. If you ship early, you have to ship on time. It could be early or late. There's like a specific window they give you because of how the carrier lanes are built out. So insert this new category of local carrier. Some are same day deliveries, some are next day deliveries, some are 2-day deliveries. The thing that's really unique about them is that they're very regional based, most of them. And even if they are gig, the ones that are national, like a DoorDash or an Uber or Shipt or folks like that, and Viho even, right? That is a gig worker still. But how they're creating the quality of the delivery and how they're showing that precision and that customer touch, I think that's something that's really unique right now. And not to disrespect UPS, FedEx, and Post Office, because what they have built is just incredible over the past couple of decades. And they're the pioneers, right? And maybe on some level dealing with an innovator's dilemma. Yes, they drive down the last block to go deliver packages, but they're not a last mile carrier in the sense of that word. This point to point delivery and this quality delivery and the cost of that delivery, I think that's the unlock that they're trying to bring. And I think they're doing a really good job disrupting. And there's probably about, 10 to 12 of them out there that I've partnered with and watching really closely. And, they have a lot of really bright people solving problems for them.
Yeah. Other than the Ubers and DoorDashes of the world, though, you look at most of these companies, they are, one of the things that I like about it is they are very regionally or a specific city or a couple cities focused, right? It's not trying to build out this massive network. And I've said this in the past. I feel like there is going to be some level of consolidation because a lot of that tech looks very similar across the board, right? And there is that opportunity to then build the middle mile. And now you have a network in play, right? Like you're going to start seeing that happen. But there is also, while we talk about all of this good tech, working in this space, I've realized a lot of the W-2s or, contractors or smaller mom and pop operations still operate without a lot of technology. So from a track and trace capability standpoint and whatnot, it's still lacking in experience. And when that tech becomes more democratized, right? Like as a W-2, you can start getting more data, or you can start, plugging into the ecosystem, let's say. I think we are going to start seeing some more magic happen within that space as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, technology is going to unlock a lot, right? Like machine learning on routes and consolidation. All of it really, though, comes down to density. And I agree with you on the consolidation side very, very much. I think you're going to see a lot of it. I think a lot of the tech is somewhat similar. I think the folks that have gone to franchise models, I think that's a really unique thing. I think the gig worker, I think depending on who you're talking to, it could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. They're obviously sharing the same pool of drivers together. So at some point that will be an issue. And you certainly have a risk of, government stepping in and creating issues, on that behalf. Exactly. I think those like GoBolt, a Canadian company that's operating in the US right now, who's building out a fleet of electric vehicles and really focused on sortation. I think like they're a really unique company to watch. They've done a really great job and a really great company as well. And I see a lot of these middle mile and sortation folks, Better Trucks and Front Door Collective and VHO and Warp and CloudSort. These are all really well run, executing, operating companies. And some of them have great tech and some of them just have really great operational execution skills. And at some point, I do think you'll see automation come in there, because when it comes to package sortation, if you can build density, there's equipment that can really help.
That's easy stuff.
That's really easy. Yeah.
From a sort automation standpoint, in intralogistics, I would say that's one of the easiest automation pieces that you could throw at.
But you still don't see a lot of them doing it, right? And I think, they're young companies and they're raising capital and all those things, right, are happening just like all of us out there. But,
exactly.
It's where the future is going. I mean, you could have a dark warehouse theoretically just sorting with automation easier than you can a pick and pack fulfillment operation, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Much easier. And I mean, if you can build to certain dimensions, it's super easy. How you induct and what line sorts to what. I mean, we did that back in, 2005, right?
Right.
That's
right.
old school tech compared to some of the stuff that's happening. And I know, Corey, you're working on a bunch of automation and whatnot on your side as well. That's way more complex.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think we mentioned a couple companies here, Corey, and I just want to make sure we draw a distinction, because it comes up a lot. I know it comes up a lot for me as I'm having conversations with brands and retailers. The difference between micro fulfillment and maybe what's coined, quick commerce or fast commerce or, delivery within 20 minutes, kind of like the GoPuff model. And as you're kind of describing and walking through micro fulfillment and everything, maybe it's just as simple as how fast the delivery takes place, but any distinction you can make between those two different models, I think would be beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you can make an argument that speed and size of a fulfillment center and speed of delivery are relative in a micro fulfillment environment. I think GoPuff and DashMart operate micro fulfillment centers because they're getting closer to customers. Now they're operating in a convenience store model. So that customer wants stuff fast and they're willing to pay for it. And they want that convenience, and it's very targeted in their real estate and where they're going. You look at ultra fast grocery or the back of a grocery store, the back of a Walmart, right? Those are micro fulfillment centers because they're close to the consumer. They're close to density and population. My definition of micro fulfillment, which I think some agree with, is a miniaturized fulfillment center in a hyper-local area. Hyper-local could be a 20-minute delivery if it's a frozen, pint of ice cream that needs to get there in 20 minutes, or the customer chooses that from a precision perspective. It could be a 1 to 2 day delivery as well.
Exactly.
We offer 35 to 50,000 square foot buildings. Amazon, their same day micro fulfillment centers are 75,000 square feet. They used to be 125,000 square feet after they returned 35 million square feet of, hundreds of thousands of square foot, buildings because of that operating expense. So I think it's a relative term. And I think it's more about positioning for precision and having the ability to get closer to customers based on the demand that exists out there. DaVinci has 6 buildings today that hit 85% next day and 100% 2-day, not only because of the stage of company we are, but we're solving a 1 to 2 day problem because most of the deliveries out there, just like I mentioned earlier, that Amazon's 50% of the demand in the US for e-commerce, most of the deliveries are serviced by parcel, and parcel can't really do better than next day. So you need to be positioned in a place where you can hit a next day and 2-day delivery because that's what consumers want. And if given the option between same day, next day, and 2-day, I would think that they're mostly going to choose next day. And I think there's a lot of data that supports that.
On the general merchandise side of things, for sure, right? Just on the other side, it's not just given the choice, it's also the unit economics of being able to do some of that, right? So, and maybe that's another, and it's not a question, but just a point to make over here. is micro fulfillment does not work in a silo, right? Like the closer you get in a hyperdense environment, the real estate cost goes up, your cube cost goes up. You need a strategy where your purchasing strategy has to align with your storage strategy, or your manufacturing strategy has to align with your storage strategy. And that might be you might need a node above all of your micro fulfillment, that is your traditional warehouse where you are storing stuff, because maybe here's the question: what's the ideal number of inventory turns in a micro fulfillment according to you, Corey?
I love that question, and it's what our technology is built around. I mean, we try to have less than 8 weeks of inventory on hand at every given turn. So what's the math on that, right? Like it's not 12, right? But it's more than 6.
Yeah, it's about 6. Yeah.
Yeah. And it depends on the category. We have some that are 6, we have some that are 8, so it's all about creating turns, but you also, at this stage in micro fulfillment, in my opinion, the lead time and the MOQs inbound from brands themselves is equally as important as that conversation. And there's a mix to that, right? And it, for us, having 6 buildings solving a 1 to 2 day problem versus 300 buildings, solving a 15-minute problem, it's a lot easier of a problem to have.
Exactly. And I mean, if you go from a 6 turn to, let's say, 3 turn, right? It's not just the turn that's the problem. Now you got dead inventory inside the building that that inventory will not be profitable anymore because you're already in an expensive real estate market, right? Like,
correct.
Specifically speaking. Or, I've seen micro fulfillment centers that have, 12-feet ceilings. Like that's, again, you don't have air storage, right? Like, so you're paying the same square footage. You don't have, pallet racks that you can store on, or have, strategies where you could optimally utilize the cube that's available to you. I think micro fulfillment is amazing, but finding a good partner and not just going by yourself trying to do this, I think that would be the recommendation to almost anyone that's looking to get closer to the customer. It might feel easier, but I don't think it is.
And at some point, that's where robotics comes in, right? There's no question. Like, building density and throughput out of the same cube is a critical thing. And there's automation partners that can do that. Shuttle systems are really expensive to go put in, but
exactly.
You're getting a lot of density out of that. Is your throughput relative? Is that, unit economics going to be in the black on that one? I don't know. I think that there's...
You can have an ASRS or a shuttle system, Corey, but if you don't have control over how your inventory turns and you got dead inventory, your cube in is not equal to your cube out, you got a huge problem.
Huge.
And that's going to catch up to you in less than 6 months.
And that's why it's so critical to understand your assortment, because it worked backwards from that. And if you can create more turns from the same set of inventories, you can create faster turns and get stuff to the consumers in a more profitable way with all of these things. And it starts with merchandising, in my opinion, because it works backwards in where you place inventory and how you place it.
Absolutely. Can't say that enough.
No, it makes all the sense. And, Corey, as we're getting to the end, I could think of like 30 more things I want to talk to you about.
Sorry, we are up on time?
I mean, it's getting there, buddy. It went super, super fast. But I do want to, Corey, if this conversation has sparked interest for somebody who has been thinking about micro fulfillment and has heard this podcast session, are there any kind of lesson learned or like any advice you would give to someone who's just thinking about it? And what are some pieces of advice you would give them as they're on that journey?
I would say the data is critical, and listen to the data. Don't try to bite off more than you can chew, but listen to the data. And the most important thing that you need to measure as a brand is the percent of revenue compared to your total operation. And I think you need to look at your inventory control of where it's placed and try not to separate your inventories for different programs in different locations, and try to have as much inventory control from similar locations, because that's a really fast way to lose control is by doing that. If you put your Shopify inventory in this 3PL and your Amazon bulk business and this distributor and this inventory, for Walmart Marketplace and that 3PL because they're on the East Coast, and now you have the whole country covered, but you have 3 different, programs with the same inventory sets being managed, that's a recipe for disaster. And I see so much of that still.
Yep.
Great advice.
Completely agree.
Appreciate that, buddy. Well, listen, I want to give you the opportunity to share with everyone where they could go to follow you, maybe where you spend some time on what social platforms you're on, and the best way to learn more about DaVinci Micro Fulfillment.
Yeah, thank you. LinkedIn, of course. You can certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn. I make it a point to respond to all the messages there. You could follow our LinkedIn page as well. DaVinciMicroFulfillment.com or DaVinciMFC.com. There's a contact us form, or you could reach out to me, COREYA at DaVinciMFC.com. I will gladly respond.
Amazing. Thank you, Corey. An absolute pleasure having you on the show today.
The pleasure was mine. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ninad Acharya, CEO and co-founder of Fulfillment IQ, and I'm here with
Dan Call, CRO and partner at Fulfillment IQ. We're the team behind the eCom Logistics podcast. Our mission is to provide you with genuine insights from our work alongside logistics leaders to help you improve your supply chain.
In the eCom Logistics podcast, we share the knowledge and the insights we've gained from working alongside amazing brands, retailers, 3PLs, and VCs, so you can make the most out of your supply chain journey.
If you like what you're hearing, we'd truly appreciate your support with a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting channel. Your feedback not only keeps us going, but also helps others find the podcast. If you think Fulfillment IQ can assist you, or if you have an idea related to logistics, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always up for a chat and ready to explore new possibilities together.
Stay tuned to the eCom Logistics podcast on your favorite podcast platform for fresh and practical insights into e-commerce and logistics. Until next time, let's keep making a difference in logistics together.